Microphone is on. Thank you.
Members of the public are welcome to join in person or electronically by video call, which links into the location at the top of this agenda. A live stream of this meeting may be viewed or listened to online at bit.ly/JoCoMeeting. For those unable to join, public comments related to items on this meeting agenda may be emailed to soups@johnsoncountyiowa.gov or relayed via telephone at 319-356-6000 for distribution to board members. Johnson County strives to host inclusive, accessible meetings and events that enable all individuals, including individuals with disabilities, to engage fully. Language interpretation is available. Please advise the Board of Supervisors office at least 48 hours in advance. To request a modification, inquire about accessibility, or request language interpretation, contact the Board of Supervisors office at 319-356-6000 or email soups@johnsoncountyiowa.gov. With this read into the record, I will call this meeting to order. It is Monday, December 6, 2021, and this is the budget work session of the Johnson County Board of Supervisors. First item on the agenda, public comment for all matters not otherwise separately scheduled for a public hearing. 4 minutes are allotted per speaker, with 1 additional minute as an accommodation to speakers with a disability that impairs their ability to speak, or to a non-English speaker requiring an interpreter. All speakers shall observe civility, decorum, and good behavior. Due to public meeting laws, the board can only listen to your issue and not engage in public discussion or take any action on an item not on the agenda. When 10 or more speakers wish to speak during the public comment section, the board may reduce the time per speaker. The board reserves the right to modify speaking time based on the circumstances of any meeting. A time limit for each public comment period may be established. If there is anyone in the public who would like to comment on an item on today's agenda or on a topic that is not on the agenda, this is the time to do so. I will not be taking public comment during the discussion of any of the specific agenda items, so this is the time to do so. Is there anyone in the public who would like to comment?
Yes, I would.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Taylor Cohn. I just want to emphasize that there have been no honest reasons given for this BearCat. We have heard lies that it has no offensive capabilities when a BearCat exactly like it was used by the feds to tear into a house in Iowa City just a few months ago. We've heard Supervisor Porter claim it's necessary to respond to people having mental health crises, necessary to respond to a crisis with an escalation in force. It's obviously not. And this is a lie that endangers the lives of disabled and neurodivergent people. Law enforcement have tried to say also that they need it to serve warrants when there could be gunfire, which is absurd because obviously an officer has to get out of the vehicle to serve a warrant, or that they need it for shootings when they could not respond to an armored vehicle in time, even if with an armored vehicle in time, even if its presence would make a difference to the victims who would not be inside the vehicle. I could sit here forever listing all the illogical scenarios that law enforcement and members of this board have insulted our intelligence with about this being necessary. If you vote yes on this BearCat, you are approving of the use of a military vehicle in Johnson County based on lies and cowardice, lies that you told publicly, lies that you let go quietly unchallenged to stand on the record. You are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on an unnecessary and dangerous vehicle to get rid of a different unnecessary and dangerous vehicle. You want it to look like you're doing something about the MRAP because you know the community opposes it, but you don't want to do anything to meaningfully change. And you're willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of county funds on that weak, cowardly move because there are people you don't want to piss off and structures you don't want to challenge for political reasons, for career reasons, for financial reasons, and you have no business making these decisions if you're willing to endanger the public and spend $240,000 to do so that things don't get weird for you at work. The last time the Johnson County Sheriff was militarized, it was a sneaky move behind your back. And this time, if this happens, it is your fault. Every consequence is your responsibility. Some of you claim the actions of the sheriff are out of your hands, that you are not in charge of what that office does. And today is proof that that is a false excuse. You could reject this tool of war, or you can give the seal of approval to them using it at their own discretion, as well as every individual police department within Johnson County that gets to borrow it whenever they like. It will be on you and the decision you made voting today. I don't say any of this because I have illusions that pointing out your lying or your hypocrisy or your cowardice will make you do the right thing today. I say it so it's on the record because your constituents know that you have an opportunity to prevent the further militarization of the police, and you are responsible if you don't take it, no matter what you say today or after today. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor, for that amazing introduction to the issue. Hi, my name is Martha Hampel. I live in Iowa City. Over the last few months, I've been working with a number of local activists to collect signatures on paper and online at scrapthemrap.org for a petition that reads, quote, "Petition to the Johnson County Sheriff, Board of Supervisors, and the Emergency Management Commission. We, the undersigned, request that Johnson County, Iowa, dispose of the MRAP, the mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle it acquired in 2014, and that the county does not replace it with a BearCat or any other similar military-style vehicle." Unquote. As of this morning, our petition has 494 signatures. I have a stack of copies of all of the signatures for each of the supervisors and county sheriff. I would like to hand these over to you now, if that's okay. If
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please take each of these signatures into account when making your decisions regarding the sheriff's budget today. I know this Board of Supervisors has received a lot of communication from the public regarding the MRAP and possible BearCat, and these 494 voices are just as important and relevant. Our petition also has the support of the following organizations: Iowa Physicians for Social Responsibility, Prairie Lands Freedom Fund, Great Plains Action Society, Corridor Community Action Network, Iowa City Democratic Socialists of America, Iowa Civil Liberties Council, and ICPD Watch. Even though our petition does oppose the MRAP, I'd like to focus on the BearCat listed in the sheriff's budget. I ask that the supervisors please not leave any room in the sheriff's budget to purchase a BearCat or any other similar military style vehicle. It is well within your rights as a board and the scope of your authority to vote down the $240,000 in the sheriff's proposed budget, which is allocated for a BearCat. The decision to remove that $240,000 is especially important, considering there is no clear enough policy regarding how the vehicle would be used, and no consequences for the sheriff's office for violating such a policy. Again, please consider all of the individuals and organizations who signed our petition and vote down the $240,000 for a BearCat in the sheriff's proposed budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment?
Yes, I would.
Go ahead.
My name is Pat Bowen, and I live in Iowa City. And I'm calling in today to ask you to vote against the purchase of a new armored vehicle called the BearCat. I agree with both of the previous speakers. Claiming that its use is for officer safety is a joke. It only provides safety to an individual inside. So claiming its use for safety in ways that it is currently, the current MRAP has been deployed is quite a stretch. The current, the current vehicle has only been used as an intimidation ploy. I don't think that's the kind of community I want to live in. I don't think it's good management of money to give the sheriff's department $240,000 without any oversight. The only oversight the Board of Supervisors has is budgetary. So legally, he can't be told what to do with this vehicle. This money could be spent for better uses for the county, such as hiring more social workers, as the sign there says, childcare, and feeding people. We are a county that are we a county? This is a question for you to think about. Are we a county that upholds power for the sake of power? I am looking for representation here. I am calling you in today to raise my voice along with hundreds of others that have signed that petition saying we don't want that vehicle in our community. Remove the current MRAP and do not approve the purchase of a new armored vehicle. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to speak? Yes.
My name is Alexey Igurtaway. And let me sign in here. So I would like to start by asking you to consider every single signature on those petition sheets being here today. You know, half of the signatures were collected offline in person, and we talked to every single individual who came to support us and sign it. And in no uncertain terms, they told us that they absolutely oppose it. And I mean, you'll have to take my word for it, but basically, I would say 60% of the people who we approached or who approached us, they were opposed to it. So really, at some point, Lonnie has claimed that the silent majority is behind, they want a military vehicle here. I don't think that's true. And I think the fact that there is 500 people on record, and this is in the course of 2-3 months, signed this is an indication that he's wrong. And some of you might think that this is a hard decision because this is about officer safety. Well, it's not. This is not about officer safety. This is about police militarization. So far, has been mostly unchecked police militarization. And it's been mostly Lonnie Pulkravik. He obtained the MRAP by going behind the back of the public and this board. And this board arguably had no direct say to this point of how the MRAP is used or whether the county should keep it. That changes today. This is your moment. Today, you are the ones who are deciding whether to continue further militarize our police, whether we continue to fight the failed war on drugs, whether we are funding the bankrupt idea that you can fight violent crime with even more violence. This is what you're voting on today. You're going on record on this issue. There's not going to be an excuse that, this is the sheriff's decision. No, this is your decision. And if you're giving police militarization your stamp of approval, you're turning it from unchecked transgression of a rough sheriff into officially sanctioned direction for our county. So the question that I would like to ask is this what we stand for? Is this what this board stands for? Because this is how people are going to interpret your vote. And we will make sure of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment?
I'll go ahead if it's, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Nicholas Tyson. Good morning. First off, I'd actually like to give you props and thank you for making this meeting accessible. I am myself recovering at home, and so I would not be able to attend this meeting if it weren't for this fact. So I do, in fact, appreciate that. However, when it comes to the issue of both keeping the MRAP and or replacing it with a $240,000 BearCat, I would have to say no on both counts. And the reason for this is simply that the sheriff's office cannot be trusted with military hardware of this kind, and I would argue of even like lesser lethality. And the reason being is that you don't have to hypothesize how these things are going to be used because there is already a historical record of how it has been used. And so pardon me if I tell a little bit of a story, but on the night of June 3rd, 2020, if that date doesn't ring a bell to any of you, that was the night that Johnson County Sheriff's deputies in conjunction with UIPD, ICPD, and as well as the Iowa State Patrol tear gassed and assaulted nonviolent protesters in Iowa City. On that same night, the MRAP was staged nearby for, well, God knows what they were going to use it for because they certainly didn't need it to protect themselves. And in fact, in most of the instances in which the MRAP has been used, you can't even twist the logic to make it seem as if it was there to protect. In most cases, when it has been used in the South District, it has clearly been used for intimidation. And so you are now going to hand over yet another piece of military hardware to the discretion of the Johnson County Sheriff's Office when in fact you don't actually have to theorize about how what their intent is going to be, because on that night their intent was very clear to do harm to people who were using their First Amendment rights to express themselves. Their only weapons, quote unquote, were words. Meanwhile, the Johnson County Sheriff's deputies, alongside other law enforcement agencies, had armor, they had tear gas, they had flashbangs, they had rubber bullets, all of which they used. And in fact, if you look at the videos that the city of Iowa City posted about this incident, they nearly spent all of the ordnance that they brought with them, all of it. And in fact, in one extremely telling moment, there was a person who needed medical assistance who was lying on the ground. And there was someone, actually a person, there was a person lying on the ground calling out for medical assistance. And what did the people on the front line, those armored fascists, do? They shot them with rubber bullets. So if the MRAP had come into play into that situation, you don't actually have to guess how they would have used it, because the only thing that they were using their weapons of war that night for was to stifle dissent. So if you okay this $240,000 for the sheriff's office, that is what you were doing. You were ratifying the violence that occurred that night. You were ratifying the violence that occurs every single time these weapons of war, because that is what they are. They're weapons of war. And when they stopped being useful weapons of war, they were given to sheriff's departments, they were given to police departments, they were given to state patrol departments, because the federal government had to get rid of it. That is why they exist. That is what their intended purpose is. And that is, in fact, if you look at the historical record, what your own sheriff's deputies have used these weapons for. And that is what they are, weapons. So to reiterate, when it comes to the question of retaining the MRAP, I am a resounding no. And when it comes to the question of giving the Johnson County Sheriff's Office $240,000 to purchase a BearCat, I am also a resounding no. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment?
I'll go ahead.
Just a moment. We have someone at the mic here in the boardroom.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Ed Flaherty. I would urge the Board of Supervisors to first off be clear that the MRAP has to go. It's being obtained by the county was a fiasco. It needs to be admitted and faced, and we do not need to repeat the mistakes of that. It is an instrument of provocation, an instrument of intimidation. You have a huge amount of responsibility and budget for the mental health of people in the county. There is immense concern that you have, and I applaud you for it, for the need for social and racial justice in this county. If you look at the MRAP, it is, as other speakers have said, an instrument of war. And it was given to the county really so that other members of the military-industrial complex could produce new ones and new ones. It's not free. I am not here to espouse defunding of local law enforcement. We need local law enforcement, but local law enforcement needs to be part of an organic community. And having the MRAP and the BearCat, for all that I know, is a simply a replacement of that with a little bit of a softer edge. So I would say do not get rid of the MRAP right away. Figure out a good way to do it, whether it's just scrap iron. Somebody wants to use it as a monument, that's fine, but get rid of that. And then before you do anything about funding for that BearCat, you need to have reams of explanations of how it might be used and a series of open meetings in terms of why we need this. It would be much more straightforward to simply say, no BearCat. So thanks for listening. Let's not repeat the fiasco.
Thank you. Is there someone on Zoom who would like to comment?
I'll go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Hoffel, and I wanted to echo Nicholas in appreciating the Board of Supervisors for offering us the opportunity to participate this way. I'm home with my grandchildren and wouldn't be able to make it to the meeting otherwise. I wanted to talk about that. On August 19th, Commissioner Hayden mentioned concerns about increasing gun violence in our community and was questioning why people weren't concerned about that. And of course, I'm concerned about gun violence in our community. My daughter was downtown Saturday night. I mean, it's because I have this concern that I object to the use of these vehicles. And to explain that, I'm going to give you a little background about myself. I attend local direct actions as a safety volunteer. I hand out water to keep people from getting dehydrated, and I'm trained in other areas of first aid. I additionally have certifications in conflict management and managing emotions and stressful situations. Excuse me. I am by no means an expert. I have enough training to be helpful when people get stressed out. But even with my limited training, I can tell you that nothing I have seen in the last year has shown me that Johnson County law enforcement officials have done enough of this type of training. Sheriffs would stand outside the protests, staring down protesters and scribbling down notes about them and being generally aggressive, because I suppose that's what they have been taught to do. Do you think that de-escalated the situation? Do you think preparing a tank to meet peaceful protesters is de-escalation? Of course not. These types of things were seen as acts of aggression and caused agitation amongst the protesters and created more bad feelings. In fact, I would say that if you would not have as many bad feelings between local law enforcement and local activists that you do if that hadn't occurred. I know I'm certainly less inclined to be gracious with local law enforcement officers due to the number of times I, a 50-year-old grandma, was pulled over and hassled last summer. The first thing they teach in de-escalation training is to be aware of your nonverbal communication. I would ask the commissioners to consider what sort of nonverbal message does a militarized vehicle serve when it rolls into a neighborhood. It's an intimidation tactic, and it's violent. And I'd wager that Sheriff Kunkel knows this just based on the way I have seen his officers handle other situations. Aggressive posturing seems to be his tactic. But that's not working so well in our community, is it? Sheriff Kunkel has stated that he has no way of knowing if situations in which they've used the MRAP have actually been useful because they don't do a post-incident interview. And I obviously can't answer that question, but I do know that you do not de-escalate a violent situation by meeting it with more violence. And rolling these vehicles through these neighborhoods is most assuredly an act of violence, whether you see it that way or not. The money being earmarked for this tank would be better spent on conflict resolution training for local law enforcement. At the very least, I would like to see you require the sheriff to provide some sort of performance indicator that proves the effectiveness of these vehicles in reducing violence in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to speak? Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Riley Einan Lynch. I live in Iowa City, and I'm new to the political scene here, but I just want to say, looking at the budget request worksheet, looks like about 1% of the request is focused on community outreach, and almost 25 times that much is dedicated to new equipment, and then the rest of it seems to be allocated to maintenance of existing equipment. And I would just like to see a budget that reflects the opposite orientation of those values, focusing more on investment on community outreach and less on new equipment and hardware.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to speak?
Yes, I would.
Go ahead.
My name is Sean McRoberts. My pronouns are they, them, their. Just want to address primarily the proposed purchase of a BearCat. I'd ask you to please not support or endorse this wasteful and unnecessary expense. The county does not need to purchase an armored vehicle or any more paramilitary equipment. In fact, it does not need the MRAP or any other military equipment that it has. These vehicles and the weaponry that the Sheriff's Department has send the message that the county is prepared to go to war with its citizens. We will strengthen our community, not through purchasing or being granted more or different vehicles and weapons, but by disarming in order to build trust and improve community cohesion. I would note as well that at previous meetings, the supervisors have said that they don't have control over the retention of the MRAP, and I am confident that you can find a way to write a budget that does not provide for the MRAP, as it also does not provide for other unnecessary or harmful means of using county funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment? Come to the mic, please.
My name is Tara McGovern, and I'm here to read a letter. The following letter is from 50-plus individuals and organizations. Amel Ali, Vice Chair of the Ad Hoc Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is the content editor, and I am her assistant. This letter was sent to you 100 days ago. Thank you, Supervisor Green, for responding. I'm going to skip the first paragraph. You have it in your email. None of you responded besides Supervisor Green. The first paragraph calls for an apology from you and for some direct action, which we gather you have passed on. So I'll move forward. During this meeting, Supervisors Pat Hayden and Royce-Ann Porter, this is the meeting on August 19th, 2021, presented false information about gun violence and mental illness to support the purchase of the BearCat. Both raised their voices at a member of the public, making direct eye contact with him while clearly expressing agitation about his earlier statements. As the time for public comment had passed, the resident was not allowed to respond to Supervisor Hayden's direct address. Supervisor Porter also directly addressed two members of the public by name at a time when these people were not in a position to be able to respond. I point this out because you tell us a lot about proper address, and you do not follow it. Supervisor Porter made damaging remarks, claiming that individuals having a mental health crisis are a danger to officers, and that officers are justified in using any force necessary as a result. Supervisor Portis stated that responding with an armored vehicle is necessary to protect officers from those in crisis. This assertion flies in the face of countless studies that have shown that the officer is much more likely to be a danger to an individual in crisis. Hearing an elected official reinforce this dangerous lie is a blow to individuals who worry that they or their loved ones could be victimized by law enforcement while in crisis. And I guess my anecdotal comment there is I'm the mother of a 6-foot-tall 14-year-old who sometimes has meltdowns in public, and I'm not confident that he's safe because of the way that law enforcement addresses people with mental illness. Beyond the behavior of these supervisors that must be addressed and repaired, the topic of the meeting must also be considered as its consequences will directly affect the public. The arguments that Supervisors Hayden and Porter made about gun violence are outright false. One of the most repellent arguments is Porter's use of the lie of black-on-black violence. That's a quote. We live in a geographically segregated society due to systemic racism shaping our neighborhoods. When people commit crimes, it is usually against the people they live near. This is not a phenomenon unique to Black communities, and it is being used to silence and redirect the conversation. A BearCat will not protect residents from harm, even if police could respond in a timely enough manner to appear on the scene while shots were being fired. An armored vehicle would do nothing to protect people outside of the vehicle. A BearCat will not protect officers either. If police are responding to an emergency, they will be exiting the vehicle. I see that I'm running out of time. You already have the letter. It's co-signed by 50-plus individuals and organizations in the area. It's signed by 200 and some signatures. If you wanted to read it, you have the opportunity to read it. I'm really not here to speak to you. I'm here to speak to the public because our voice needs to be heard.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment?
I could comment.
Go ahead.
All right. Hello, my name is Audrey. I also want to say I appreciate the fact that there is still a Zoom option for these meetings. It does make it a lot more accessible, so I appreciate that. So I wanted to talk today about the budget item for the BearCat, specifically because like my own background, I actually have a degree in social work. And I think that if you were going to give any department an item that costs $240,000 without a stated purpose, I would much rather see it go towards something like the Guiding Center, which I am very glad that is something the county has been working on. Because while I have a background in social work, I unfortunately did have to leave my field due to burnout. And I know many other people that have. And the main reason that social workers experience burnout is because there is never enough staff. There is never enough other social workers. And so I'd much rather see that money go towards social services and other forms of prevention. For another story, I guess, related to the Guiding Center, the reason that prevention is so important to me is that when I lived on the west side of Iowa City a long time ago, we had a neighbor who had 2 kids actually all 3 of her kids had mental health issues. And one of them at the time had to be transported all the way across the state of Iowa to Sioux City in an ambulance because there were no mental health services available for him in the area. And she was already struggling to pay rent. So I have no idea, if she was, I know she wasn't able to afford that ambulance. She was evicted later on. So I feel like this money could be put toward preventing situations like that, rather than spending it on militarized vehicles that are more of a reaction rather than prevention. So that is all. I'm just here to say that we should get rid of the MRAP that the county already owns. We should not spend $240,000 on another militarized vehicle. I'd much rather see, if money is going to go to a department for an item that has no stated purpose, I'd much rather see it go to the Guiding Center or other social services. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment?
Good morning, friends. Right off the bat, I'm just going to say that I will not respect this time limit. I'm not going to take up a lot of time, but I mean, I may go over a little bit. You're going to give Kunkel and his staff unlimited time to speak, and the public y'all disrespect deserve at least that courtesy. Pat, you can call recess or have these Keystone cops arrest me. I really don't care. Speaking of which, also fun fact, when I got arrested, when Iowa City Manager Jeff Ruin got me arrested this spring for protesting outside of his office, Brad's cronies at the jail refused to give me shoes while I was there. So that's why I'm wearing orange Crocs, so I can be set if, Pat, you have me arrested today. The Johnson County Sheriff's Office does not need armored vehicles. Over the summer, data presented to you to this board by the sheriff showed that his office's usage of the tank is problematic and racist. This is because of its disproportionate usage at protests in predominantly black neighborhoods. Their history of misusing armored vehicles is reason enough to reject the sheriff's proposal to buy a BearCat, the smaller size of which means that it will be misused even more than the MRAP. DMPD regularly brought their BearCat to the Des Moines Farmers Market. There's no reason why these clowns won't do the same. Supervisors Green and Green Douglas, thank you for standing up for what is right regarding this issue. Johnson County law enforcement do not need an armored vehicle, be it an MRAP or a BearCat. And I appreciate you for having the courage to stand against party politics, cronyism, and blatant falsehoods. I'm pretty sure by this point, y'all hate me, but I respect you for standing up for this. Stand your ground and don't be intimidated by the sheriff. Supervisors Hayden and Porter, y'all just need to chill. I may have been a bit rude during former hearings about this issue, but at least I'm standing up for what I know to be right. You all know damn well these vehicles do not protect officers and are quite useless in natural disaster situations. The arithmetic of this issue is quite simple. The harm of this over-policing outweighs any supposed benefits Bradley is going to lie to you about today. Unless either of you can say honestly that you've talked to Southside residents who want the sheriff to have any armored vehicle, you shouldn't act like this thing is warranted in Iowa City. Supervisor Sullivan, I don't think you're a bad person, but your lack of self-awareness is a very toxic presence in this community. With one breath, you will boast about not being racist because you have 3 African-American children. With the next, you will tell a prominent black activist in this community that he's delusional because he's been drinking too much Kool-Aid. This spring, you admitted that you thought the MRAP was wrong, but you were putting loyalty to the sheriff, a fellow Democrat whose ass you've constantly kissed, above what you knew was right for this community. You call your opponents liars and premium self-promoters while ignoring very legitimate criticisms that they bring up. Your ego prevents you from acknowledging the legitimate criticism people have of you. Since you blow them off, you don't grow as a person. Do better. Sheriff Kunkel, there is no reason for you or your department to have this vehicle, except perhaps to make your militarized presence known in the community. It's a shame that people like Rod will probably vote yes and put party and personal loyalty above the welfare of our community. Tell you what, since you're so eager to have a toy, have this one. I used it at a meeting a few months ago. So yeah, hopefully that will kind of make up for whatever you're trying to achieve here today. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't say shame on you, Kunkel, for using your position as sheriff to arrest and humiliate your political opponents. ICPD Chief Dustin Liston stated the order to arrest Mo Traore came from the sheriff's department after he spoke against your department in pursuit of armored vehicles. You're not
respectful of the time limit.
He's not fit to carry a gun or lead a department.
All right, we are back from recess. We are on item B of today's agenda, public comment for all matters not otherwise separately scheduled for a public hearing. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Amel Ali. And I just wanted to, first of all, say thank you for having an accessible meeting platform through Zoom. It's nice that on days when I have to nanny and I don't have time to be able to make it in, that I can watch these meetings because it is really important. I just wanted to kind of echo what everyone else has been saying. I think this purchase is just a really poor decision. I don't think that it's going to do anything for the communities that you think it's going to do anything for. In fact, if you guys really cared about those communities, I think that you would invest that money into those communities, because studies and research show that, you know, crime rates are lower when people are proud of where they live. There's a lot that can be done with $240,000. I'm a victim of sexual assault, and there is probably one place that you can go to receive treatment or advocacy if you're not insured. I'm lucky I'm insured, but it would be really awesome if women in my situation would be able to get the adequate help that they need. And if we're talking about mental health, that really is a big thing. And I was sucks apparently, like, you know, when it comes to mental health, and you guys have this good chunk of money right now that you could do something really incredible with, and, you know, make this community even better, helping the community, making sure that the people here have the needs that they need addressed, because that's what's going to lower crime, not giving the sheriff a $250,000 BearCat. I really hope that you guys would take some time to just like think about that and how else this money could be better used in the community, because I just really don't think this is the right decision. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment? Yes.
My name is David Hampel. I've lived most of my life in Iowa City. I went to school here in the 60s, which makes me probably one of the oldest people in the room right now. I'm 73 years old. I came to school here in 66. Those were 4 tumultuous years in Iowa City, if you weren't around. And the Iowa ICPD was brutal to those of us who were protesting in the streets, protesting against the Vietnam War. I saw kids dragged by their heels, their heads bouncing on the concrete in front of the IMU. I saw them with my own eyes. It could have been me that they picked out. So with that in mind, this is just a stupid idea. This means to me that the Iowa City, the people like you who represent us, don't give a hang about what's going on. Buying this stupid machine just takes me back. It gets me really riled up, you can tell. It's just a bad move. You know, it's not like I'm some dopey, crazy person. I've never done dope. I'm allergic to, never mind. I'm a pretty straight arrow guy, you know? I hated the Vietnam War. I hate war, period. But I owned a business in Iowa City, downtown Iowa City, for 25 years. I'm a musician. I owned Ebel Music for 25 years. I played in the Cedar Rapids Orchestra for 42 years. And I did a lot of community stuff. But I will continue to protest against war, violence, stupid moves by the people that run this city. Don't do it. Don't let yourself fall into this trap. It's a stupid way to throw money away. And we've got so many people in need. We've got poor people in this place, in this Iowa City. It's a great place to live, right? Not for everybody. Not for everybody. You ought to think about doing more for the people that can't get in the inner circle, even close to it. We need to spend our money with that, folks. We don't need a damn truck with wheels. Now, I remember June 3rd, believe me. That just made me horrendously angry at the place that I thought I called home. It ripped me up that night. I cried. I pounded. Brought me back to the Vietnam War era. What the hell are we doing in 2020? You know? Look into your deep, deep heart and your conscience and vote against this.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to speak?
Hi, my name is Felicia Pieper.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Felicia Pieper.
Thank you.
Write it down. I can't write and talk. So I am here I want to echo everything that everyone said, and I want to thank everyone for taking time to be here virtually, and I want to thank you for offering that. I want to specifically talk about the disingenuous argument about a BearCat or an MRAP or a tank doing anything for gun violence. I would really love to see this community invest truly in preventing gun violence and improving our community. And I think throwing out this argument that the tank that we've seen used as an intimidation tool does anything to do that. There are programs, there are things, but we have to invest in them. And it's not transactional. It's not a one-time purchase. There are programs. There's a program called Cure Violence where they use the logic of preventing infectious disease spread. So when you have violence in the community, you isolate that and you support people and you come together. It's hard. It's hard work, but a tank does not do that. And I'm really, really frustrated that argument has been used to defend militarization. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to speak?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, but go ahead.
Hi, my name is Josh Bates. I live in North Liberty. I just want to echo a few things that have already been said. I know it's kind of a little repetitive, but I want to make sure that people hear how big or well supported this concern is. I also want to appreciate you allowing me to get on Zoom here. Not all of us can show up in person during the day. There is certainly a way better use of money for the community than this. It certainly is not a tool that would be the MRAP, I suppose. I should mention that that's what we're talking about, and the BearCat, well, both. They're not particularly tools that could be improving the safety of the community. I think that the best use of doing that would be actually trying to fund more social services and improving the lives of folks in the community. That tends to lower issues of crime and things of that nature more than a show of force. And that's really what this is. I have talked to a lot of folks in the last few months. I actually ran for school board, and I have gotten a lot of input from folks that also have mentioned to me that this is not something that they're interested in. So I know you got some signatures and some emails, but I just wanted to let you know that even in the community of North Liberty, Tiffin, and heck, even over in Oxford, there are folks that are pretty concerned about the increased militarization of our police force. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to speak? Go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Noah. I'm also here to join literally everyone else here is talking to you about how you don't need vehicles of war in our local community. There's been no evidence. There's no evidence that actually prevents or stops crime in any way. Doesn't keep officers safe. I mean, they've shown how they use it. And we know how they use weapons of war. Tear gas is banned by Geneva Convention and for use in war. And January 3rd, they showed how little regard they have for humanity when they continually launch tear gas. When they saw an ambulance coming, they still launched tear gas canisters. That just shows you how much the local law enforcement actually cares about the community and that they will use violence against them just because they can. It's shown like time and time again. Like I've had, they have no de-escalation whatsoever. Like I don't know how many interactions y'all have had with them. Like all the interactions I've had with them is the police have constantly escalated the situation and trying to make things worse. Like when I film them, they get mad at me and tell me that you can't film us for some strange reason because apparently police accountability is a foreign idea to them. So yeah. Also, using ableist language to say why you need to have a weapon of war is unacceptable. I don't think you've apologized yet for that, and that's not okay. Or have you?
Remember, this is the time that we are just hearing comments from the public. We are not engaging in any discussion or commenting.
I know that. I just was curious if that happens. I didn't know if you have or yet.
So we will not be responding to any questions from the public. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment? Is there someone on Zoom who would like to comment?
I would like to if there's time now.
Yes,
I didn't want to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming out today. My name is Jen Lee, and I know I've met a lot of you in the community because I often have worked really hard to support people who have struggled in this community. And I'm very grateful that we're having this discussion. I think it's great that you are allowing everyone to talk, and we're really, really grateful because we know that your jobs don't exactly pay well, if at all, depending on who is in the room. I want to say first that I am, to the surprise of many of my friends, very pro-police in Iowa City in terms of the police people that I know the best. I absolutely adore and have been the greatest supports to the things that I've sought in the community, such as Denise Brotherton and Colin. They've been so helpful and they've listened. But anyone who lives in Iowa City more than a few years and pays attention to the dynamics and looks at city council reports over the years and crime reports knows that we have people who suffer desperately, and any supports we say that we're going to provide to them are all completely lip service. It almost reminds me of the Groundhog's Day, that if you look back in time far enough, even a couple years, we go through very similar discussions and decisions and votes every few years or every few decades where we say we're going to do something to support people and it looks great on paper and we seem kind, but anything we look at in terms of follow through, we just don't do it. And people who are involved in the city all know this, and they hope that people don't notice. Well, we're noticing, and I'm so sad, to be honest, because I love Iowa City so desperately. And I thought, this is the kindest place to live. This is the place where we have the experts for violence, trauma, mental health. We know ways to work well with people who live in our community and support everyone. Yet we ignore or don't look for those collaborations. And so a big way, I feel like we are the biggest hypocrites in Iowa City, where we look great on paper, but if you live here long enough and you know people are affected, you drive around any neighborhoods that have low-income people, you can see we clearly choose to look the other way. We have one of the most segregated communities in Iowa City. We have one of the most segregated communities in Iowa City. It doesn't take long to look and say, wow, most of the poor people live in very select neighborhoods. And that also happens to be where the BearCat has gone the most. And so I really, really beg people to finally put your money where your mouth is. Please go to sleep at night knowing you did the right thing. I have such a guilty conscience. I don't understand how the people involved in our city say one thing to people during the day and do another thing behind closed doors, knowing most people don't have time or energy or money to follow up and see what happened. And the people who were affected the most, they can't show up. They're the ones who are stuck having to work jobs that don't allow them to leave during the day. They don't have the time or the safety or security to speak out. They're terrified. Please listen to us. If us people who do have the time and luxury to speak are trying to speak out on behalf of the whole community, please, often we'll say, oh, well, they'll come and speak out, or they'll give us their opinion if they're able to.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you.
I love Iowa City. Please do the right thing.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to speak? Again, is there anyone else in the public who would like to speak? Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to speak? One more time. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to comment? Hearing none, I will move on to item C, fiscal year 2023 budget planning. For the public's benefit, I do want you to know the process and procedure we are using during this budget period. So we have been into this budget period at 3 or 4 weeks, meeting with individual departments who are presenting their proposed budgets. At this point, we are not voting on any specific requests. That will happen when we receive the decision package, and there may be 2 or 3 votes as we work through that decision package. Dana, John, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I do not have the schedule in front of me. Do you have can you tell us estimate when that time will be, when we go through the individual requests and vote on those items?
This is John Hannaford, budget analyst. Let's see, according to the schedule, let's see, the first vote on the decision package is January 12th, and then a week later we'll vote a second time, and then the next day a third vote if needed. So
okay,
that's what the schedule says.
Very good. Thank you, John. So January 27th, it will be the first time. No, 12th. I'm sorry.
The 12th.
The 12th, okay. January 12th.
And John, it's probably worth mentioning because like this date, this was supposed to be a different day today, and it changed.
Yes, that's true.
So the schedule can change.
Yes.
And if it does, we'll try to let people know that.
Right. Yeah. And the updated schedule will be on the finance department website if people want to check that out. If it changes, we update it there.
Very good. So right now that's scheduled for January 12th, but do take a look at the website as sometimes that changes. So at this point, thank you, John.
Sure.
So at this point, when we meet with these individual departments, it's a time for the departments to present the proposed budget and for the board to have an opportunity to ask questions, to ask for any clarification as we go forward. So with that, again, we are in item C, fiscal year 2023 budget planning. First up, discuss fiscal year 2023 proposed budgets for the Sheriff's Office, Departments 8, 47, 68. Good morning, Sheriff Kunkel.
Morning. Nice to see everyone. So what I'd like to do is, I guess, go through the 08 changes we made, and then I'll get back and cover the decision package in the end. The other things I would note, first of all, regarding, so Department 68, law enforcement proceeds, we don't anticipate any changes there. 68 is where we keep our grant money, forfeiture money, those kind of things. We aren't anticipating any changes in that department. 47, court services, so this is what we use for prisoner transports, extraditions, and those kinds of things. Again, no changes in that department. In 40, so that's where our technology lines come from. The large expenditure you see in there is that $200,000. That's a set aside we've been doing every year for, at some point, we'll need to replace our operating system for our records management. That's something we've been discussing here recently in some conversation with IT about the longevity of that program. And what we're learning is it's very specifically tailored for the jail, but it's also the same operating system that all the other agencies and the JEC use. So when the day comes when TAC 10 is at the end of its lifespan, that's going to be a significant undertaking for all the agencies. And the UAC committee at the JEC is actually paying for a consultant. So in the meantime, that's what that $200,000 is for, is to set aside. At some point, we'll need to replace that. The other changes involved are the contract for Gray Key. So this is what one of the main items that the JFAC uses for their digital forensics. The licensing costs went up there significantly. And then the remaining expenses that we have are just anticipated for our annual contracts that we have for all of our tech needs. In the 08 lines, we actually went through these line by line a few weeks ago and made adjustments. Some of them we either decreased significantly or completely eliminated, which in some of those lines, that total decrease was just shy of $23,000. And then the other increases we saw for things such as vehicle conversion costs, training expenses, and then other tangible items like uniforms, equipment for our divisions, those went up largely because what we're seeing cost increases due to COVID and supplies, material costs, and those kind of things. So that total increase in the 08 line comes to $141,000. The other significant increase within that number is the food line in the jail is going up by $122,000. The reason is we shifted to outsourcing our food service in the jail through a private company. So while the increase in food costs to cover that contract is at $122,000, on the backside of that is the staff that program replaced, as they retired or moved on, that salary money is being saved over here, through salaries. So the overall savings by shifting to an outside food service is about just shy of $160,000. And then again, some increases in training as we've added a person to investigations, and then we continue to hire new staff. We just need to make sure we're getting them the proper training. For example, a couple of our sergeants are going to a police command staff school training provided by Northwestern University pretty soon. So we're investing in training not only in the frontline staff, but also the first-line supervisors.
What kind of training?
So Northwestern University has a pretty prestigious, I would say, program and curriculum for like police management. So they have a longer, I want to say it's like a 4-month school of police and command staff training that past administration had sent people to. And then the shorter one they're going to, it's a 2-week class, and do you remember I don't remember the exact title of it, but.
So it's like from administrative, like the managers.
For sergeants,
Okay.
correct. Yep.
All right.
We've got overall a pretty new crop of sergeants in their early kind of years of their career being first-line supervisors. So we're also making sure we're getting them more than just, some of that kind of check-the-box management training that people get. This is more about effective leadership and police leadership, that kind of thing. So we're just making sure we're providing better training opportunities for our sergeants too.
Brad, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Since you mentioned that level of management, we've had conversations, Randy with you and Brad with you, about the salaries that are being paid to those folks, and some errors we made in the current budget and how we were going to fix that and everything. Where do I see that in this budget, or how would it show up, or does it show up separately, or how are we addressing that?
So I don't think that shows up in this, and Susie, I may need help explaining this, but from the way I understand, finance just works that in, so it's not something that's presented here.
But is it already included? John.
John.
Got it.
Okay.
So John Hannaford, budget analyst. So the changes that they made for personnel costs is built into their payroll worksheet that each department does. So that's already built in. And if I'm not mistaken, is it taking effect this current fiscal year?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I
And
asked
so,
if
yeah,
it was.
yeah, and it'll carry over for next fiscal year. It's built into their payroll worksheet.
Okay, and it's not going to look then like a big jump because we
No.
actually instituted it in the current fiscal year. So
Yes.
it should, whatever the increase is should just be the increase that everybody's getting, right?
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we had that right. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
And on the revenue side of things, the increases we're going to see is minimal coming from Solon. They're increasing their contract hours in 2 hours a week in July. Tiffin, however, is jumping up almost 20 hours per week. Currently, they're at 75 hours, and we have in the last conversation I had, there was somewhat of maybe a miscommunication whether it's going to be going from 75 to 94, 95, or 96. Regardless, that's a significant increase in the contract that they're paying. We've spent a lot of time at Tiffin here recently. They actually hired a consultant to look at their law enforcement needs for the future. And to summarize the consultant's findings were that right now, no surprise, they're getting a significant deal, if you will, by contracting with us. And I think that's a big reason why they've been able to kind of grow and spend their money on infrastructure and amenities and all those things because their public safety costs have been so low. He anticipated probably in 5 years or so they'll be at a point where they really need to either kind of go all in with a 24/7 service or decide if they're going to stick with us. For now, though, the demands and kind of the expectation of the city are that they need to do a significant increase. So that's why you'll see the revenue for contract law enforcement go up about $100,000 just coming next year because of that 20-hour increase largely in Tiffin.
And then the additional patrol deputy is to respond to those increases primarily?
I'll come back to that in the decision package part. And then weapons permits, will be a significant decrease in that. There was a huge jump this year just because if you recall the history of the gun permit laws, and they were changed about 10 years ago, they're 5-year renewals. Coming into January of this year, we were at the second end of the 5-year renewal period. So we had, and that was one factor, I think, we had a significant amount of gun permit applications come in about the first quarter of the year. That has really tapered off. And now that the permitting laws have changed at the state level again, I think less people will be getting permits, and really we'll see these cyclical increases every 5 years, but overall I think the permit revenue will continue to decrease. And who knows if eventually that whole kind of responsibility will shift to the state anyway. I mean, the sheriffs across the state we're doing the legwork for the state, and then in the end we just send it to them anyway and they issue their permit. So that could always change too. So that covers the 08 side. Any questions about 08? I'm happy to move on to the decision package.
I do have a question. You were commenting about our transition to a food contract, and the cost would be offset by the decrease in personnel. And that is because of retirement, not layoffs. Is that correct?
Right. So we started looking at this back in April. I think we first met with the staff and explained we were going to examine this just as a way to, is this the direction we want to go? And we put it out for an RFP, I think it was in June, 1st of June. And during that time, the full-time staff, full-time kitchen staff retired, left, and moved on. And we didn't enter into the contract until mid or late September, I believe. In fact, I don't know. We put it out in June. I want to say it was out for a month. And just in the meantime, those folks just decided to seek employment or elsewhere or just retire.
Okay, thank you.
And then lastly is the decision package. So these pages are out of order. So the largest item you'll see on there is that $404,000 to replace our body camera system. A little bit of the history behind our camera system. So we first integrated car cameras into our patrol division back in 2007. And then we added body cameras in 2012. And we've been with the same company, the same equipment ever since. The matter of fact, the screens that are in the patrol cars are the original screens. We have done, some of the components were upgraded back in 2015. I'm sorry, 2015 we replaced some of the body cameras, and then over time we also went from, the original ones were kind of a standard definition, went to a high definition, but what we've run into is they're at the end of their life, and we're at a pretty critical point now with our body camera and car camera systems, really, that these need to be replaced. Frankly, they probably should have been replaced or planned for this a year or two ago. But we're to the point now where we're having to either, some staff had to transition their body cameras over to the patrol division, or we had to take camera parts from other vehicles and make them work somewhere else. It's getting harder to get replacement parts. It's just there at the end of their life, and this is an absolute must that we have to do.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So this is for all of the cameras you have?
That's correct.
So it seems, clearly it's a huge chunk of money.
Yeah.
But I'm fully supportive of body cameras and vehicle cameras because of the protection it gives to the public as well. And I have a couple comments. It just seems kind of maybe lack of planning, that these are all needing replacement at once, instead of having created a schedule of replacement to reduce the budgetary impact and, just that time overlap of when you are replacing them and some are already maybe on their last leg. I'm having a real hard time trying to wrap my head around throwing down this chunk of change all at once because of not creating a kind of a staggered
like a schedule
maintenance and replacement schedule. The other part is that I guess I just would like to know if internally you have a policy that these are always used, they're always on, body cams, for example.
Yeah, we have policies in place to cover, here's when they're used, here's the retention. I mean, it's very...
Okay, so if there's a here's when they are used, there's a here's when they're not used?
Yeah, there will be those instances where, we're not going to have them on every time, for example, it's not on the entire time during their shift. There may be those interactions where, let's say it's some sort of a medical nature of somebody. If it's at their discretion to shut it off for some reason, but for the most part, they're on in like all of our citizen encounters, but they're probably not going to be on if they go into Casey's and Hills to buy a pop. Does that make sense? We're not going to...
I understand it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it makes sense. I don't know what you're asking. Yes, I understand it.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't necessarily agree that that's the best.
Okay.
I think that they should always be on if you have them.
If what?
If you have them, they should always be on when in the public. Because, you just don't know what's going to come up.
That's true.
Those unusual circumstances.
And things often can happen just like that. So,
right. Therefore, it should be
and
on.
we're well aware of that.
Especially for that amount of money, I think they should be on for everyone's protection.
And then back to your point about basically planning, I agree. There needs to be some sort of planning or like a replacement schedule almost. We have an idea of the lifespan of a car, and those are significant expenses we make every year. We can figure out what the lifespan of our firearms are going to be, or vests and that kind of thing. I don't have an answer as to why this was never addressed or covered prior to me coming into office, but it's a dire need now.
So I get that, but I guess what I'm getting at is, as we go through and make decisions on these decision pack requests, one of the things that we sometimes have to say no, or gosh, maybe we can do part of it. So I think that I personally, in order to make a decision when we do on this, would like to know how many, I mean, and I'm not saying, because I hear you saying all right now. But what if we could only do some? So what number, you know, what's the individual cost, and what number could you do this year with the idea that like there'd be the same number, you know, where we would start, in fact, staggering it so that the impact is spread out rather than bam, all at once.
So this is going to a completely new system, a completely new vendor, a completely new product. So we can't take, currently where the system is L3, is this a switch, we're gonna switch to WatchGuard, completely different manufacturer. So we couldn't take, you know, a WatchGuard camera and integrate it with an L3 system. It's also seriously updating the capability of the device itself and how we can manipulate it. And then another struggle we run into with IT is we're still having to burn DVDs and provide those to the county attorney every time, you know, they need something for a case. So this is basically switching from an Android to an iPhone.
So a new system, I get that. So I could envision an overlap. So you're still using some of these old ones as you start purchasing part of the new ones, and then, you know, each year phase out some more of the old ones, because, I mean, this is a huge chunk.
I agree.
It's just huge, and I find it completely and utterly staggering that this was not planned for. And so I get that the switchover is needed, and I understand the reasons why. I'm just saying, how many could you stand to not get this year and double up on the systems, using two different systems?
I just don't know if that would be even a.
It's possible. I'm just wondering if there's a willingness.
I don't know. I just don't think that's the kind of the responsible thing to do. Is then we rank two totally different systems, and then we'd still be paying for licensing for both, for maintenance for both. I'm at first kind of at this conversation. I just don't support doing that. And again, I completely agree too, it is a staggering number. I mean, when that number came in, and then there's also an additional $10,000 there for connected to this for the technology requirements, for this data storage. So the total package price is $414,000. There is no way around, that's a huge number, and I wish we would have seen this coming a year ago or 2 years ago. It's here we are, and we're at a critical point, and these needing to be replaced.
You didn't answer my question, though. My question is, if we could only budget for you to get some of them, what is the cost per individual item, and how many could you?
Yeah, and I don't have an answer. I don't have, if I could say, is it 20 units or is it 30? I just don't have an answer for you right now.
That would be really helpful.
I can get that for you.
That would be good to know. As Supervisor Green Douglas said, the total that you have here as far as replacement, and that would be good information.
And I did actually check and see if ARPA was even available for a purchase like this, and no, it's not a qualifying expense. So we're kind of stuck with, that's the price tag. And this amount of money this is something, law enforcement across the nation is facing, is everybody understands the importance and why, here's why it's so necessary to protect the public and the staff. They're at the end of their lives, and I think we're on borrowed time with the longevity of the equipment we have now.
And can you remind us how many units that gets you?
So, do you know off the top of your
It's going
head?
to be for about 100 units.
And are they?
Total, so body-
100 total, both body and in-car?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is this buying them from?
Not taking any public comment.
Hey, Brad.
Yep.
So I have a question about like the capacity of the devices and the capacity of the storage and everything. I may be misremembering, but I think when we first invested in this, it didn't necessarily do everything that I had thought it was going to do in terms of like how long you could hold on to video and how you know, when stuff got copied over other stuff, that kind of thing. And I think that's so critical that we, you know, hold on to stuff, I think sometimes longer than we think is necessary. And I agree with Lisa, I don't really like the idea of the cameras going on and off. You know, I think that just sets up a bunch of problems. So would this have greater capacity than the existing system in terms of its ability to just basically capture and store data and transfer data and that kind of thing?
That's a question I don't have an answer to right now. I think, because what you're essentially, I think, getting at is the storage amount enough where we're not having to start writing over it
exactly.
to put new content on there.
Exactly.
And I don't know. I'll find that out for
Yeah,
you
would
too.
you please?
Go ahead.
I was wondering if the car cams are the type that automatically go on when there's a stop, for example.
So yeah, they turn on like when the lights are activated on a traffic stop. They can activate it on their own. You know, sometimes it's necessary to activate it prior to the stop for some reason.
Right.
And there's even administrative controls you can set on them where instead of it activating the instant you turn the lights on, when you push that switch to turn the lights on, it captures, say, the last 30 seconds or the minute. And body cameras do the same thing anymore. So that way you can turn it on after when you get the chance sometimes, and it's captured everything before. It just depends on those settings. So
That's a really good feature. I'm glad we have that.
yeah, it's very, very helpful because sometimes, say a stop sign violator happens right in front of you and you turn your lights on to make that stop. Oftentimes it captures, you know, the car coming and the entire violation too. So
I
it's a really
got
handy
the
feature.
impression, the reason I asked the question is I got the impression, and I'm having to rely on a somewhat faulty memory here, it's been a few years, but I think that we were somewhat limited, or the previous sheriff felt like we were somewhat limited in terms of policy by the technology, and that's not what I want to have happen. You know, I'd like to have the technology be able to allow us to make whatever policy we think is the best policy, as opposed to, well, we can't do any more than that because this is all the technology will allow. So I hope that as we're investing in something that allows you guys to make decisions based on best practice rather than, well, this is just all we can do.
Right, and the technology's changed a lot too, because what we see is more and more, you know, as we get more and more information requests in the video, we got to make sure we can redact it appropriately so we're not, you know, a person's social security number isn't repeated, or a person who's maybe not consenting to their image or whatever it may be, we can blur that out. So it's really come a long way.
Is there a feature also, so they go on automatically then, in certain circumstances? Is there a feature then that disallows the officer to turn it off?
So like once it's activated, they can't turn it off? I mean, they have to be able to shut it off at some point. We just need to make sure that if it is shut off for, if it's during a call or whatever the reason may be, it's documented as to here is.
So that would be a policy thing.
Right, that'd be a policy.
Do you have a policy that they can't turn it off during the stop?
I believe so. It would just depend on, again, if it does come off for some reason, it needs to be documented. You know, I don't think it's going to be a black and white issue. There has to be some sort of, who knows what situation may come up where it may be necessary.
Policy can be written, and you and I both know that. Policy can be written to address that kind of situation so that you can. Okay.
How did you evaluate the different options, Sheriff, of going from L3 to Motorola? Did you put it out for bid, RFP?
So we looked at WatchGuard. A couple other agencies use WatchGuard. We also had reps from Sector, which they make, or GTAC, and then Axon, which is the company that Taser, it's the company Taser's manufactured through. And it was basically just looking at what do they have to offer, and then also a lot of the peer review is a big factor when we have to make that decision. You know, what's everybody else doing, and are they happy with it?
Dana, from procurement policy, is that satisfactory?
I'm sorry, I was not paying attention to that particular question.
I had just asked the sheriff about how he identified the vendor to propose to us for the camera replacements, and and he said, Sheriff, would you mind just briefly repeating yourself? So I'm
Yeah, so I just saying, instead of, we didn't put it out for an RFP. So what we did was we just we looked at Axon, we looked at WatchGuard and Sector, talked to what everybody else is doing locally, and just kind of made the decision, here's where we want to go.
I'd want to look back at the procurement policy as far as the thresholds, but that could quite possibly be an acceptable, getting competitive bids and quotes as opposed to bidding it out. So I'll have to follow up with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Sheriff, do you have any idea what the expected life cycle of these new devices is?
No, not off the top of my head, but that's another, back to Lisa's point about the replacement schedule. I don't know that we ever probably should have anticipated that L3 would last as long as it did, but we need to know that so we can start thinking about, okay, if this is a 6-year, investment or 8 or whatever it may be, that way we can start planning for it down the road. Because when I saw this number 2, I was shocked, but there's no way around it. In the end, whether it's expended now or incrementally, it is what it is.
All right, we can move on.
Yeah, and so then the other $10,000 in the decision package there is, again, that's the data storage for the camera system. I'll drop down to the personnel requests in the vehicle. So, Rod, back to your point about Tiffin. So, the county continues to grow. The amount of traffic we see continues to grow. And then in there is that pretty significant growth we're seeing in Tiffin. And with them wanting to add 20 hours a week, that will stretch our current staff pretty thin. This will help alleviate that, and I'd like to even really have this person on our late night shift to kind of level out the numbers we have on the shifts. Right now, the current contract with Tiffin comes out to about 9 hours a day. Break that down for the 3 hours per shift we have. The deputies work 9-hour shifts, so on paper, to keep things even, they're having to spend about a third of their shift in Tiffin, then throw in, if they have an hour break, that leaves them the remaining 5 hours of their shift to cover Oxford and rural western Johnson County, that area. So it becomes a tight kind of shift for them when they're assigned that area to cover those hours. And late nights often winds up having to kind of pick up the slack, because as days and evenings are busier covering calls, late nights calls slow down, they can do more catching up on town time. But also late nights are busy too. So this would help just spread that out over the shifts and just keep up with the growth that we're seeing in the county. And then the community outreach line, that's something I wanted to add, because as we've been looking at the budget, we don't have a line like this at all. If we want to do some sort of community outreach event, as we've done recently at a couple of the high schools by bringing in donuts on a Friday, we find it somewhere else in another line in the budget, but I think it's more responsible, makes more sense. Let's just have a line to do more in the community. And, I'd like to see us doing things like National Night Out and making a more committed effort to do stuff in August for National Night Out, or a trunk or treat event in the towns. We need to invest in what we're doing to build on our relationships with the community and the small towns we have contract time with.
Yeah, it certainly seems like if you're going to have a particular officer who we know is going to be spending a particular amount of time in Tiffin, to have some meet and greets where the people of Tiffin could just come meet that person and say hello and put a name with a face and that sort of thing. It seems like there's value in that.
Absolutely. And even, as we're working with Solon to establish a substation, that's going to literally give us that physical footprint in town. So kind of the same thing, what can we be doing to increase our community connections in Solon now that we're going to have a physical space up there. So, this is a new line to add that I really think is important to kind of build on the connections we have with the community. And then lastly, in the decision package, just going back to our, the previous discussions we've had over the last year about the BearCat.
Oh, can I back up, Brad? I'm sorry, but
Sure.
the personnel. So you've got the expense there of a new patrol deputy, but there would also, and there should be some, not quite enough, but some offsetting income by the increase in the contracts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that $100 and some $1,000 a year, our total increase in revenue. Yeah, that
Right.
extra 20 hours a week is a
Right,
pretty
so this is
significant
not
bump.
really going to be, I mean, it's money in and money out.
Right.
Yeah.
Except for the vehicle.
Right.
Sure, yeah, if you want to. So, here, we can go back to your body camera question for a minute, Lisa, if that's okay.
So,
This is Captain Hendricks.
Captain Matt Hendricks. To go back to your question a little bit on why this wasn't prepared for before this point. So, we were with a company called L3. L3 got bought out. They got bought out by a company called Cohn. And then what happened was we went to order equipment and they said, no more. We don't have any more. Excuse me, I was just running up the stairs. They said, we can't, we're not going to service it anymore. So they put us in a bind.
Yeah, and my question wasn't so much why it wasn't done before, because it wasn't done before. But how many can we stagger the cost? I think they're very important. I think they're important for protect the public as well as the officers.
Yep.
I think that they're, they're that piece, they're that eyewitness. So it's super important. So I don't disagree with the need for them.
Yep.
What I am struggling with is this budgetary impact all at once. Yes, it wasn't planned for ahead of time. How many can we double up? You said it's irresponsible to double up on two systems at once. I say it's irresponsible to throw down a chunk of change like this all in one budget year. So I'm wondering, my question is how many can we phase in and get new ones this year?
So we've been.
With the idea that next year we will finish out the, 50/50?
We've been demoing some different camera equipment that's out there. So there's several different camera companies that are out there. We've been demoing and we've been running 2 different platforms for the last month or 2 while we utilize some different equipment. It's been very problematic, not only for us, the county attorney's office, IT, to try to utilize 2 different platforms. So now, if we do a criminal case, if we do an OWI, for instance, and we have the primary deputies on one platform and the assistant deputies on another. So now we're going to present them with a hyperlink saying, here's one half of the videos, and here's a DVD for the different half of the videos. It's been problematic to try to run 2 different platforms. So.
Okay. I still didn't answer my question, but I get that it's hard, but it's not impossible, and this is hard. This chunk of money is hard. One department, getting that amount because of not planning for scheduled maintenance and replacement. And I get that you're moving to a new system, but I think we need to somehow do it in a staggered way so that we can have ongoing a staggered replacement schedule. And if we get them all at once, we're going to be replacing them all at once. And so
maybe you're correct.
That's what's irresponsible.
Yeah.
I think.
Was Bill
Bill.
able to?
He's right there.
Bill, can you respond to this discussion?
Thank you for coming up.
Hi, Bill Horning, IT Director. So you guys are asking if they can have 2 separate systems running at the same time? I just want to make sure I
And
understand.
they have
what the
some of their
question is.
cams on the current system, the new, and then replace some of them on a new system. So we would have 2 separate systems. It would be like 2 different departments, technically, in a way, in terms of their camera equipment.
Sure. I mean, physically, obviously, it's possible. It's going to be their operation that they have. They're better versed to tell the operation of whether that functions for them. But yes, I mean, we could certainly have 2 systems and they could deploy half their fleet with the new system and half their fleet with the existing system for a year. I mean, it's certainly a possibility and it would function just fine. It doubles their work because now they have to go back to both systems to get, information off of it and that kind of thing. The only thing I would add to that too is the county attorneys having issues with all their videos. This new system would allow them to store their data within that system and make retrieval of that information much easier for them.
So there may be some significant expenses to try to do two systems, is what you're saying.
Well, just like Brad pointed out,
Well, you
you
said
would,
double the work.
Double the,
well,
and I don't.
Okay.
Okay.
So they would have, when I say double the work, they would have to administer both systems. So that's what double the work is. The cost, you would still be maintaining the L3 to keep that functioning. And as Matt pointed out, potentially you could run into problems where you wouldn't have equipment in those older cars that function, because this company's come up to them and said, you know, the cameras that we can sell you don't work with L3 right now. That's really what they did. They gave them a camera that went in their car, and they went to install it, and it didn't work.
There's no support, right? That's
Very limited support and very limited parts for them to access them.
And I see this going into a position where, so right now, the company bought two companies is what they did. So their L3s, their in-car camera system has been fantastic, and they've been very stable, and they've had a great platform for us. There's another company called Coban who has an excellent body-worn camera. Their initial vision when they bought the two companies is they're going to merge the two. So they're going to keep L3's in-car camera system, and then they were going to implement this Coban body-worn system. Once they got them there, the engineers are like, never mind, we can't do this. So they're going to keep the Coban system, and they're going to get rid of all of the L3 system, which is everything that we have. Now, the Coban also requires an additional, there's a web platform that we go to view all this. I foresee this getting to a point where they say we're not even going to support the L3 system anymore in and of itself for viewing cameras and everything in an attempt to push everybody into this new system. We didn't have any idea that this is coming. Like I said, we literally called to order parts, and they said, even the salesperson called immediately. He's like, I didn't even have any idea that we were heading down this road. So I think we're going to hit a point, in my personal opinion here, but I think we're going to hit a point where they're going to say, we aren't even going to allow you to go in and view your videos. That platform is no longer available.
Supervisor Green, you could, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Captain. Okay, thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
And then lastly, in the decision package, and again, going back to the previous discussions we've had throughout the year, and I believe the last time we talked about it was the replacement of, or rather the purchase of a BearCat. We opted to defer to the budget process, so here we are.
All right.
And then lastly, go ahead.
Sheriff, just a second. Supervisors, any additional questions?
Yeah, Brad, and a big part of this conversation has been the fact that this has been a multi-agency vehicle. Basically, it's been used by a number of different agencies, but a lot by the primarily by the Iowa City Police Department. And have we had any conversation? Are they planning on buying anything like this? Do we have any idea about that?
I think they're kind of waiting to see what we do.
Okay. Fair enough.
Supervisor Porter.
Yeah, I want to say something because in our community as a Black activist, this was a main concern for me. I just need people to know in the community that when this first come up, I literally called Brad and asked, could we have a conversation? He came down here, he spoke with me in regards. Now, I've been in the neighborhood where on the southeast side of Taylor and Davis Street, and I've seen the raids where this MCAT has been. And I saw a raid where the MCAT the MREP was outside, and yet I'm seeing kids come out, sheriff's department, police bringing children out of a home. So therefore, I had some concerns. So we had this discussion. I met with him. He took me out. Well, I met with him out there. I went to see the MREP. And for me, it's very intimidating. Very. I didn't like what I saw. So I don't need people to tell me how I feel or how I feel about something, because I am, too, not wanting to see that thing on the streets. So therefore, I asked the sheriff, was there a smaller vehicle that they can use to go out into the community when needed? That's when he spoke of the BearCat 2 and showed us something that looked like a smaller ambulance type vehicle. Therefore, I was very happy with that one because of the simple fact that MREP is not going anywhere. whether you want to say don't vote on the BearCat, if we don't vote on the BearCat, the NREP is still going to be in our community. That is what they will continue to use. We don't have, all 5 of us sitting up here, do not have a say in that. So wanting to see a smaller vehicle go out into the community was what I suggested so that we didn't have to have the MREP go out. So that's my piece on that.
Thank you, Supervisor Porter. Supervisor Green?
Being a resident of Lone Tree and now rural Johnson County, the only experience I've had with the MRAP was June 3rd last year when my partner got tear gassed by area law enforcement peacefully protesting. I think it's inappropriate to have weapons of war in our community, whether they come straight from the Army or whether they come from defense contractors. I don't think that it's the most responsible use of the funds that we're charged with disbursing. Further, I'd also point out that back in June when we began this conversation, or at least after I had joined this board, something I floated was the idea of providing armor for patrol vehicles, because, you know, that's what you folks are in most of the time, and with the realization that that does not provide an equivalent order of protection as an armored vehicle does. And I would have been interested to have seen a proposal for that, or you know, maybe trying it on a couple of vehicles and, you know, seeing if for questions of maintenance, if it was helpful, if it was going to reduce the life of your vehicles or whatnot. But it seems like you are going to, that the decision we have is either you continue with the MRAP or we place it with the BearCat. And as someone mentioned, you know, when the only tool that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And one of the money aside, one of the silver linings about the MRAP is that it is a big, ugly, difficult to wield hammer, so it sees less use than I would imagine a BearCat would see, just by virtue of the fact that you have limited number of staff who are qualified to drive the thing, and that it is, you know, an undertaking for you to get it out and position it. But, you know, looking at the history of its deployments, like I said, last year, you know, I just don't think that this is appropriate for our community.
Thank you. Any other comments concerning this item?
I'll just mention that I've been trying to get some feedback from the city of Iowa City and haven't had a whole lot of luck. And I'm frustrated with that because I think that it seems like a ping pong ball. It gets hit to the county and it gets hit to the city and it gets hit to the county. I've had some frustrations with the way that this has been used in a few cases, but the gentleman sitting here had nothing to do with that. Those were with the city of Iowa City. So I don't like the fact that we have this kind of ping pong game, and that's certainly got to be frustrating to the public who's trying to figure out where to focus. And so I'm hopeful that I'll have some conversations with them soon, because obviously
I'm not taking any public comment. Go ahead, Supervisor Sullivan.
Obviously we're at December whatever today, and John said we'll have to vote on this by the 12th, so hopefully we'll have some better conversations between now and then.
Yeah, going back to some of the comments, both today and then our discussion in here on August 19th, I'd like to point out a few things. And the first one is logical fallacy, which is when an argument is rendered invalid by trying to there's a flaw in the original structure. And I would say there are two logical fallacies regarding this whole thing. And the first one is that accepting that the sheriff's office needs an armored vehicle. So that's the very first thing that, like, if you need this. So if you need it now, is it this one or this one? Nothing has, we have no any kind of data indicating that we actually need this. The other fallacy.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
What would be the amount of data that you would need?
Showing, okay, first of all, there are data out there, in fact,
Okay.
showing agencies that have these in areas that have a lot more incidences of violence and that, you know, like what has happened in terms of officer shootings?
Mm-hmm.
Have they gone down? And in fact, they have not. But the very fact that you scoffed at me when I asked for data was very disturbing, because data, I mean, numbers speak, they do. And so the other logical fallacy is that if you don't support the sheriff's office having an armored vehicle, therefore you don't believe in officer safety. And that is extremely disturbing, because when I asked, the majority of the deployments of this have been, as Rod pointed out, with the Iowa City Police Department. When I said, well, you know, what about your office? And you gave an anecdote of a man who was wielding a weapon, and then your office approached with the MRAP. You spoke to him, and he yielded the weapon. It was unclear in that whether you got out to speak to him or if it was done through some kind of mechanism. Either way, it almost sounded to me like the tactics of crisis intervention training were what convinced this man to yield his weapon, and not the presence of an MRAP. And so that being used as an example of it working was just kind of like, again, another, it's a good story, but it doesn't really prove. And I asked, well, so are you sure that he yielded his weapon because of the presence of the MRAP? And again, my question was met with scorn that, well, obviously we didn't ask that kind of information. And that's the kind of thing, is that there needs to be follow-up, you know, like post-incident interviews to find out what, you know, like what ended up happening. Well, like what impact did the MRAP have on that particular incident and the outcome? And that can, I mean, clearly that can only be done by, you know, through an interview type situation. And I don't think that that's an unreasonable request. My only way I could even, the only thing that I thought was good about consideration of the BearCat was that then we could possibly have some impact on the policy. When I pointed out that the policy that you currently have was just really not a very good policy, there were several things wrong with it. And again, part of it was the vagueness, and it would only be used in these situations or an unusual incident. That's vague wording. You do need to be as black and white in the policy as possible, because we both know that the gray area is going to come in the enforcement of somebody breaking that policy. So I could never support the BearCat, but I just, again, will go on record as not supporting the MRAP, and I would urge you all to consider the benefit that it has given to your department and the impact it has had on the public, and think about returning it. I don't think that it has been any great benefit to you, and you haven't been able to respond to that.
Could I just share a little bit about the incident you're talking about? In that field that day, I was a person, the last time I've had involvement with the MRAP, I was in back of the MRAP, and it was the situation you speak of. A suspect had run from state patrol. He made his way into a field. He shot at one of our deputies in a DNR in a truck. They were going over the culvert. He just took a lucky shot up. The bullet went right behind our deputy and the DNR officer's head into the vehicle. You know, he's a father, he's a husband. So obviously all the troops are called in. This suspect's at the bottom of this culvert. We've got the state patrol there. We've got county there, Iowa County, Johnson County deputies, other officers. This field is a good 75, 100 yards. It's open. There's a lot of dangerous area there. We know he's armed. We've got a perimeter set up. We've called for the MRAP. There are snipers that are pointing towards this gentleman's area. He starts to light the ditch on fire. So now there's smoke. We're talking about what are we going to do? You know, we don't want to just walk down there. He's already shooting at our officers. So we came up with the plan that let's get in the back of the MRAP, drive down there so we can make contact with him, see if we can convince him to give up. So that's what we did. 4 or 5 of us got in the back of that MRAP. We drove down there. We were able to converse with him long enough. Finally, he gave up. You know, if we wouldn't have had the MRAP and we would have just walked down there and he would have thrown another lucky shot up and hit one of us in the head and killed us, I'd say it's worth it. That one time made it worth it to me. So, I mean, that stuff doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. There are bad people in our community. That's just the way it is.
Sheriff Kunkel, any additional comments before we move on?
I don't think I'll ever convince you, you know, that it's necessary, and I understand that, and I'm not going to belabor the point. I understand the trepidation and the reservation a lot of people have about it. I get that too, but as I've stated before, my job is to also make sure that the people that serve at the sheriff's office and that the public are safe to go home every day. And we do everything we can to mitigate circumstances and make sure we're not using force, that people are kept safe and that things are resolved peacefully. And that doesn't work every time. And we have to be prepared for those times where everything else fails. And, you know, I don't live and work and operate in the world that ought to be. I mean, we work in the world that is, and that is sometimes there are dangerous situations that we send people into harm's way into to solve and to keep them safe. Sometimes they need to do it within the confines of an armored vehicle. And I think we have been responsible in how we've utilized that vehicle over the years, and we will continue to be responsible and accountable for it.
Thank you, Sheriff. One final comment, Supervisor Green.
Thank you. Neither do we live in the world as it should be, but it is our responsibility to do what we can to move the world toward what it should be, which is what we are undertaking to do here. To Supervisor Green Douglas's earlier point about having an after-action review, I'd simply want to pause and recognize the 18 folks who addressed us this morning, the 500 signatories of the petition. You know, for a lot of folks in the community, that is the after-action review.
Thank you for this discussion. We will move on. Sheriff Kunkel.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll take a 3-minute recess. We are back from recess. Before we move on to number 2 under fiscal year 2023 budget planning, I'm going to ask Dana to speak to Supervisor Green's question about our previous discussion in the body and vehicle camera replacements.
Right. So Supervisor Green asked if the bids and actually were they quotes or bids that he was claiming he had? Quotes, I believe. Email, quotes. Perhaps written. Well, according to the policy, and I'm making some assumptions here, so assuming no federal grant monies, state pass-through federal grant monies are involved, and then also that the quotes given are not in the form of a lease or a lease to purchase type of an agreement, then according to our general procurement policy, amounts greater than $25,000, which this clearly would fall under, the policy states that you should use request for proposal or a minimum of 2 written or email quotations. So based on Sheriff Kunkel's comments, it does appear that he would be compliant with the procedures within that policy.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for that feedback. All right, we will move on to number 2. Under item E, discuss fiscal year 2023 proposed budget for Information Technology, Department 7. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Supervisors. Bill Horning, IT Director. So this morning we'll talk about our IT budget for next year. So the summary is that there will be a $2,000 increase in revenues and a decrease of $175 in expenditure. Just normally our budget stays pretty even there.
Made a profit.
I moved some money around in the expenditures and it was 175 less. And I raised the county assessor and city assessor fees just a small amount. They hadn't seen an increase in 10 years, so we bumped that up just a little bit. As far as my budget information planning, obviously we have no state mandates. We continue to work with the surrounding communities to do fiber projects in town, which saves us in costs and doing that individually, which is always really good for us. We also do a lot of work together with the surrounding communities with GIS, with our flyover and mapping type information. So as far as future predictions, what's going on, I mean, the same as really as last year. The biggest demand we have is file storage space. There's just more and more requirements to store things, especially in the video age and recording age. We have all this information. We took a look at the sheriff asking for a new camera system. That's going to require a large storage pool to be able to keep that video for as long as you want. So that's where we see the need. We've added a complex storage system that's spread about 3 different buildings for redundancy with terabytes. And we don't talk gigabytes anymore. Now we're into terabytes and quantities of terabytes for storage. So anyway, just that's our future. As far as staffing requirements, I already came to you earlier this year, which you approved. I'll be adding 2 additional staff to my programming area. That's really the only change I see coming down the road with my staffing. And then you asked for new processes or collaboration, coordination. My key thing here is I think the county should look at trying to find a way not to move pay itself with paychecks. We need to be able to find, with checks, not paychecks, but with checks. We cut each other checks, each departments, and then so you go through the process of creating the check, which then gets deposited by a department. It goes through the whole process again to be moved into another account. In my humble opinion, that's is a waste of people's time and effort. We should just be able to move that money electronically from one fund to another and be done with it. Do you want me to go over any of the actual details of the fees, or is that sufficient for you?
Supervisors, any questions, comments?
Bill, did you include any money in this budget for ongoing outsourcing of some work for next year?
I did not. That came up after this deal. So right now I have positions available to me that are obviously not filled. So there's money in the budget. As we fill those positions, as we talked about, that will start eating that reserve, so to speak, away. And I will have to come before you and ask for funding to continue that outsourcing.
I just think it's good for the whole board to understand that there's a potential for a budget amendment here. If you get everybody hired, but we still find a need to maintain our outside consultant, then we could well have a budget amendment.
That would be true, yes.
But we know that now, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything additional, supervisors?
Do you want to just, I know that it's not in 23, but just let the full board know that at some point you're going to be looking at moving us from on-prem to O365, and just to give us an idea of what might be coming down the pike there?
I can cover that. I did tell my liaisons my last meeting that is something that Clint and I have been talking about. Microsoft, and not just Microsoft, all software companies are moving to a software rent solution instead of buying a permanent license like they used to do. They're moving because they're finding their revenues aren't as good as they want. So they're moving to a yearly subscription fee to access their software. And we see that coming for pretty much all of our software out there. Many of the pieces have already moved to that. Office will be one of the next ones coming with Exchange, with our email piece. Even our Windows, I hear grumblings that at some point, we buy a PC or a laptop and Microsoft Office, or excuse me, Windows comes with it. Eventually, you'll have to renew that every year to maintain your Windows licensing. That's the model we're moving to. So that said, we've been looking at potentially moving our internal Exchange, at least initially, so our Exchange server in-house that does all of our email, to the cloud. There's obviously a cost to that. There's less work on our part to maintain that. We still have to back it up. But the reality is, eventually, they're going to force us to do that. We won't have a choice. So we're just starting to price that out and start to look at that. And as we get those numbers together and have some solid information for you, I'll come to you before a work session just to give you a heads up. That is a fair increase compared to what we're spending now to maintain the same licensing. Most of those seats are minimum $8 a person per month, and you can, depending on the licensing that you have, there's 3 different levels, you can be up into the $20 per user per month. And when we have over 550 people on the network, that becomes a pretty big ticket, on a yearly basis, so.
All right, thank you for that. Yep, and so we will move on to number 3, discuss fiscal year 2023 proposed budget for the Technology Fund, Department 40.
Correct. So the Technology Fund, overall expense increase of $62,000 from last year. Most of that is hardware costs and software. We've obviously expanded our network. We have the GuideLink Center that needs to be maintained. We've expanded our network. We put firewalls between the different office segments to protect us from malware and spyware. So just a small increase comparatively to the budget size. They pointed out in here, so apparently, I'm not sure where the security budget was or who created it. It was a security budget created a couple years ago to maintain our camera internal security system. And last 2 years ago, during COVID time, the physical plant's video recorder and that software the hardware needed to be replaced, the software needed to be replaced, the physical plant had not budgeted for it. So I took that on and took care of those things, and I'm now maintaining it. The one piece of that puzzle that I didn't do was the cameras themselves. So after a conversation with John and Gio, as budget was coming up, we decided that money that was put there, we just took it out of, was it the physical plants?
The capital expenditure.
The capital expenditure for a physical plant for the security cameras and moved it into 0640's budget. That way it's all in one place, all the security in one place. And, we can maintain it from there. That way when Gio comes and says, hey, I've got 8 cameras that need to be replaced, we can say, go ahead and take care of it, and I can make sure it gets taken care of. So we don't have to talk to 3 people to find out is the money available and those kind of things. So it was just a shift. Okay, so the networking budget is pretty much the same. We upped it just a little bit for, like I said, mostly for the switches. Didn't really have anything additionally on there. Any specific questions on the central technology budget request?
No.
Okay. The document management budget, we've been doing our diligence, trying to spend down the savings that was started a few years back. The request is very similar to last year's, just a little bit more. We are still taking pretty much all of the county attorney's large $55,000 a year expenditure and taking that out of savings and dropping that number down. Since it was just sitting there, we're kind of using it up and making the budget, that particular line item more zeroed out. Any questions on the document management?
So Bill, would you say I mean, how, in terms of stuff that really needs to be digitized and isn't, I mean, how far, quote unquote, behind are we? I mean, I know that you never get everything done immediately, but like, how much longer is this gonna go on?
I honestly don't get involved
Okay.
at that close a level with the departments. Danelle, before she left, did tell me that they finished doing all of their civil documents, and they were working on the next batch, which I think were the criminal documents. She did not say how much stuff they had there. I do know that in the sheriff's shed there, building where the attorney's documents are stored, there's still a tremendous amount of boxes up in storage up there. But I think they're the last department. I mean, every now and again, a department come up with a smaller project to do, but most of the departments have kept up and done, other than the treasurer's office, who is just yearly doing their yearly motor vehicle stuff.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, because the recorder and auditor used to have line items similar to the treasurer, but
Correct.
obviously the auditor's not even there anymore and the recorder's down to almost nothing. So I assume that means they got where they had to be and they're just maintaining now.
Correct.
And it's the attorney's office that's the one that really.
That's behind.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So moving on to the GIS budget, which pretty much maintained the same as last year. Again, we'll budget to pay for the pictometry fly and then ask the local communities to reimburse us for their portion of the University of Iowa, Iowa City and Corval. Kicks us a little bit money back as part of that fly, and that way it doesn't cost. But we budget the initial expenditure for that. That comes out of savings, so it's no new monies that are coming out of your general fund. The money's already there available, and then we just replenish the account back when we get paid. And we did take a hard look. I asked Rick to take a hard look at our roadmap. I understood there was a little bit of curiosity about the roadmaps and whether we had leftover ones. And he says that they've been working on that, getting that smaller amount so that there is in fact no roadmaps left at the end of the year. According to the treasurer, it's a very popular thing, just to let you know. People really do like our roadmap. Any questions on the GIS budget?
No questions.
And that concludes the 040 budget. If there's no further questions.
It sounds like there's no questions. Thank you, Bill.
Excellent. You guys have a great afternoon.
You too. All right, we will move on to number 4, general budget discussion. John, anything for us? No. Supervisors, anything we need to talk about as far as the general budget? We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. Dana, nothing from you?
Nothing today, thanks.
All right, with that, we are adjourned.
What do I need to do, just power off?
Yeah.
Thanks, John. See you guys tomorrow.
Okay, John. See you soon enough.
Dina,